My name is Dr. Raymond Okafor. I was a cardiologist for 32 years. I spent those 32 years fixing hearts, stents, bypasses, ablations, cardioversions. I have performed or supervised nearly every procedure designed to keep the human heart beating, and I want you to appreciate the specific irony of what I am about to tell you. In September of 2022, my own heart stopped in the middle of a morning jog in Riverside Park in Memphis, Tennessee. I was 61 years old. I had a 100% blockage in my left anterior descending artery, what we call in cardiology the widowmaker, and I died on a running path between a dogwood tree and a park bench with a plaque on it dedicated to someone named Harold Fitch, beloved husband and father. I noticed that plaque on the way down. I remember thinking, Harold, I understand you now. And then everything went white. Let me tell you who I was before Harold Fitch's bench. I grew up in Lagos, Nigeria, the second of 5 children born to a civil engineer father and a mother who taught secondary school mathematics with a rigor that her students either came to love or transferred out of within the first 2 weeks. There was no middle position on my mother's mathematics class. I came to the United States in 1985 at the age of 24 on a graduate scholarship to Vanderbilt University, carrying 2 suitcases and an absolute certainty that I would return home within 5 years. I am still here. Memphis got into my blood in a way I did not anticipate and never fully examined. And by the time I understood that it had happened, Robert Johnson and Beale Street and the Mississippi River had become as much a part of my internal landscape as the Lagos waterfront of my childhood. I did my cardiology fellowship at the University of Tennessee Health Science Center in Memphis. I joined a private practice group in 1994. I became the kind of cardiologist that other cardiologists refer their difficult cases to, which is the professional equivalent of a gold star, and which I accepted with the particular satisfaction of a person who was raised to regard excellence as a baseline expectation rather than an aspiration. My mother's mathematics class. It follows you. I was married to Gloria for 30 years. Gloria was a corporate attorney, sharp and funny, and the only person I have ever met who could out-argue me on any subject, including cardiology, which she had no formal training in, but had absorbed through proximity and stubbornness. We had 3 children, Adeze, who we called Ada, a software engineer in Austin, my son Emeka, a second-year medical student at Meharry, and our youngest, Nora, who was 19 in 2022 and studying journalism at the University of Memphis, 15 minutes from our house in East Memphis, close enough that she came home for dinner most Sundays and far enough that she felt the appropriate independence of a college sophomore. My agnosticism was not a dramatic philosophical position. I want to be clear about that because dramatic philosophical positions make better stories. But mine was simpler than that. I was a scientist. I spent my days in a world governed by evidence, by mechanisms, by cause and effect relationships that could be measured and replicated. I had seen enough suffering, enough random and senseless cardiac death in people who had prayed sincerely and died anyway, to find the architecture of conventional religious belief difficult to inhabit. But I was honest enough to acknowledge that I did not know. I had colleagues who were deeply faithful and colleagues who were committed atheists, and I felt that both groups were claiming more certainty than the evidence supported. I held my uncertainty carefully. I thought that was the responsible thing to do. Gloria was Igbo Catholic, the kind of Catholic that goes all the way down, and she prayed for me without comment for 30 years, which I found touching and slightly unnecessary. She lit candles. I reviewed cardiology literature. We were happy. Now let me tell you about the morning of September 14th, 2022. I had been running in Riverside Park 3 mornings a week for 11 years. 4 miles, the same route, the same playlist. Fela Kuti first, then whatever my daughter Ada had most recently insisted I needed to hear. It was 6:20 in the morning. The Memphis September air had that particular quality it gets in the second week of the month, when the worst of the summer heat has fractionally relented, but is not committed to anything yet. Warm, thick, honest about its intentions. I was approximately 2.5 miles into my run, feeling the easy rhythm of a body that has done this enough times that it no longer requires conscious management. I have a thing I do as a cardiologist when I run. I take my own pulse. Not constantly, not obsessively, but periodically. A professional habit, the same way a mechanic might listen to his own car engine with slightly more attention than a civilian would. At mile 2.5, I take my pulse. It is wrong. Not racing. Not irregular in the way that would produce obvious symptoms. Wrong in a quieter, more specific way that 11 years of cardiology has made me able to read the way a musician reads sheet music. I slow to a walk. I am trying to decide whether I am catastrophizing, whether this is one of those moments where medical knowledge becomes a liability because you have too many possible explanations for a sensation that a non-physician would simply jog through. And then my chest answers the question for me. The pain is extraordinary in its completeness. It occupies every available space. It radiates into my jaw, into my left arm, into my back with a thoroughness that I recognize, with the detached clarity that sometimes arrives in extreme circumstances as textbook. Left anterior descending territory, anterior wall. I am having the heart attack I have been treating in other people for 32 years, and I am alone on a running path in Riverside Park, and my phone is in the armband on my left arm, and reaching it requires a coordination that my body is no longer reliably offering. I get the phone. I dial Gloria, not 911, Gloria. I want to tell you that I have examined this decision many times in the years since, and I cannot fully account for it clinically. But I think the truth is that what I wanted in that moment, more than emergency services, was her voice. She answers on the second ring. I say, Gloria, I am in Riverside Park and I think I am having an MI, and I need you to call 911 and come. There is a silence of approximately 1 second, which I later calculated represented the time required for a 30-year marriage to transmit a volume of information that would take anyone else 5 minutes to process. Then she says, in a voice I have never heard her use before or since, I am already moving. Stay on the phone. I sit down on Harold Fitch's bench. The dogwood tree is doing something lovely in the early light that I notice with the peripheral attention of a man whose central attention is consumed by a pain that has now reached a scale that eliminates the possibility of denial. The Mississippi River is visible between the trees. I have run past that view 3 mornings a week for 11 years, and I want to tell you that it is beautiful in a way that I had stopped seeing, the way you stop seeing things that are always there. I see it now. I see it with a completeness that the situation has stripped all ordinary filters from. Gloria's voice is in my ear. I can hear her moving, the sound of the garage, the car. I try to respond, and the response does not fully arrive. There is a pressure building behind my sternum that is now less like pain and more like the approach of something large, something that has its own momentum and its own timeline and does not require my participation to proceed. And then the bench is gone. There are no stages to what comes next, no tunnel, no gradual transition. One moment I am on Harold Fitch's bench with the Mississippi River in my peripheral vision and Gloria's voice in my ear, and the next moment I am in a space that does not have a Memphis address. I am going to tell you what happened, and I am going to resist, as much as I am able, the temptation to make it more organized than it was. Near-death accounts are sometimes told with a tidiness that I think misrepresents the experience. What I encountered was not tidy. It was vast. It was total. And it began with something that I, specifically, was not prepared for. The peace arrived before anything else, and it arrived at a scale that made the word peace seem like describing the Pacific Ocean as a moderate body of water. I had spent 32 years in medicine managing emergencies, managing crises, operating in environments where the absence of peace was the baseline condition, and the ability to function within that absence was the professional requirement. What I experienced in that space was the complete and utter absence of emergency. Not because nothing was happening, because everything was fine. fundamentally, constitutionally, structurally fine, in a way that had nothing to do with circumstances and everything to do with the nature of the space itself. I had no body. As a cardiologist, I find this the most conceptually arresting aspect of the entire experience. I had spent my career maintaining bodies, specifically hearts, specifically the hydraulic and electrical systems that keep blood moving through tissue. The entire edifice of my professional life was constructed on the premise that the body is the person, that the continuation of the body is the continuation of the person, that when the heart stops, the person stops. What I experienced was the direct refutation of that premise, delivered not as an argument but as an experience. I was completely and entirely present, more aware, more precisely myself than I had ever been inside a body, and I had no body whatsoever. The light was everywhere, and I am not going to pretend that I have a better description for it than every other person who has tried to describe it and come up short. What I can add is a cardiologist's observation. The light had a quality I can only call cardiac. It pulsed, not mechanically, not like a machine, but the way a living thing pulses, rhythmically, warmly, with the quality of something that is both constant and alive. I found this detail upon reflection either the most meaningful or the most suspicious thing about the entire experience, and I have not finished deciding which. Within the light, or because of the light, there was a presence. I'm going to use the word presence because it is the most accurate word I have, and I'm going to resist appending a name to it because I think names carry too much prior content, and I want to describe what I encountered rather than what it reminded me of. What there was, I want to be very precise, was a personal awareness that was also somehow an impersonal principle, an intelligence that was both specific and total, that knew me specifically and also contained everything. I am a cardiologist. I am not a mystic. I understand that what I just wrote sounds like exactly what a mystic would write. I am telling you anyway because it is what happened. There was communication. It was not language. I want to say that clearly because the account I am about to give you is necessarily translated into language after the fact, and the translation loses something essential, the way sheet music loses something essential about the actual experience of hearing music. What arrived was complete understanding, instantaneous, without ambiguity or subtext, and what I understood was this: the heart, the physical heart that I had spent 32 years repairing, is a symbol. It is functioning as a literal pump, yes. The cardiology is real. But it is also pointing at something. The muscle and the meaning have the same address, and the meaning goes deeper than the muscle. Every time a human being has loved generously, the physical heart has been the instrument of something that does not originate in the chest cavity. The organ is the receiver. What it receives comes from further away than anatomy can measure. I was shown, and I use that word deliberately, I was shown what love actually is, and I am going to try to tell you, and I already know the attempt is insufficient. Love is not an emotion that some people have more of and some people have less of. Love is what exists before anything else exists. It is the condition of existence, the way water is the condition of the wave. Every act of genuine love that has ever occurred in human history has been the same love, moving through different apertures. It does not diminish. It does not run out. The supply is not finite because it is not a supply. It is the nature of what underlies everything. I received a message. I want to call it that because that is what it was. Specific, directed at me, shaped for a cardiologist who had spent 32 years believing the heart was primarily a pump. The message was this: you have been fixing the symbol. Now go home and attend to what it points at. There was a life review, and it was not what I expected. I expected, if I am honest, an assessment structured like a performance review, because that is the framework a high-achieving person builds for self-evaluation. What arrived instead was more like a feeling of every moment of my life experienced simultaneously, not evaluated, not graded, but felt, from the perspective of everyone else who had been in those moments with me. I felt what it was like to be Ada when I missed her school play in 2003 for an emergency case that I could not have anticipated and could not have refused. I felt what it was like to be a Mecca when I told him at 17 that medicine was a calling and not a career choice, and then did not leave enough room for him to discover whether that was true for him or only for me. I felt what it was like to be Gloria, praying quietly in a kitchen while her husband reviewed cardiology literature in the next room. None of it arrived as accusation. I want to be very clear about that. It arrived as information, as if the universe were saying, here is the full picture. You were working with partial data. This is the rest of it. And within that complete picture, what I understood about my life was not that I had failed. I had loved genuinely. I had worked with genuine dedication. But I had also maintained, in the center of myself, a careful distance from Gloria's faith, from my children's inner lives, from the patients who wanted to talk about what dying meant, and who I redirected gently toward the clinical conversation because I was more comfortable there. The distance was the thing. That was what I was being shown. Not my failures, but my distances. And the message underneath the message was, come closer. In whatever time remains, come closer. I want to tell you about the specific moment of the message from what I am calling heaven, because I said there was one in the title, and there was, and it was not a metaphor, and it was not symbolic, and I have spent 3 years trying to find a way to describe it that does not make me sound like a man who had a hallucination on a park bench. My mother died in 2018, breast cancer, 18 months from diagnosis, in Lagos. And I was at her bedside for the last week, and I held her hand the way I had held hundreds of other hands, and I was grateful that my professional experience made me useful to her in those final days, even as it also, I think, made it easier for me to stay in the clinical lane and harder to simply be her son, undone, without expertise to offer. I did not cry at her funeral. I organized things. I was useful. I did not cry until I was alone in a hotel room in Lagos 2 days after the burial, and even then I stopped before I was finished, because stopping felt like what a composed person did. She was there. My mother was there, not as a memory, not as a projection of my grief, as herself, with her mathematics teacher's precision and her cook's warmth and the specific quality of attention she had given me my entire childhood. The attention that made you feel that your existence was the most interesting thing she had encountered all day. She communicated without words, the way everything in that space communicated, and what arrived was everything she had wanted to say from 2018 until the moment I sat down on Harold Fitch's bench. 4 years of unlanded messages, delivered at once. And the primary message, the one underneath all the others, was the same one I had received from the larger presence. Come closer. Stop managing from a careful distance. Come closer to the people who need you to be undone sometimes. I was coming back before I finished receiving it. That is the most honest thing I can say about the return. I did not experience it as a choice made, and it did not feel complete. It felt like a book closed at the best part. The part came back in fragments. Gloria's voice first, then pain, then the extraordinary indignity of a heart that has restarted and is making its displeasure known. Someone was doing compressions. I know what compressions feel like from the outside, and they are considerably more comfortable from the outside. I heard Gloria say Raymond, and I said, with what I later learned was my first conscious word upon return, I know. She said, know what? I said, all of it. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, good, now breathe. I spent 12 days at Methodist University Hospital, 3 of those in cardiac intensive care. My colleagues, who are excellent physicians and human beings of genuine warmth, visited with the careful professional sympathy that I recognized from the inside now, in a way I had not from the outside. And I made a note to change how I entered rooms. Emeka flew in from Nashville and sat with me in a way that his second-year medical student's training had not yet taught him to armor, and I was grateful for that. Ada came from Austin. Nora came from 15 minutes away and brought terrible hospital vending machine coffee and sat on the edge of my bed and told me about her journalism classes with the unfiltered enthusiasm of a 19-year-old who does not yet know that adults are sometimes too tired for full enthusiasm, and I received every word of it like water. Gloria sat with me the last night before discharge, and I told her everything, all of it, including my mother, including what the presence had shown me about the distances I had kept. She listened without interrupting, which was unusual enough for our marriage that it was itself a form of response. When I finished, she was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "I have been lighting candles for 30 years for exactly this." I said, "I know. I am sorry it took so long." She said, "Raymond, you are a cardiologist. You are always the last one to believe the heart can do what it can do." I have not returned to full-time cardiology practice. I work 2 days a week in a consultative capacity because the work matters, and I have 32 years of knowledge that does not become less useful because I died on a park bench. The other days I spend differently. I sit with cardiac patients who want to talk about what dying might mean. I talk to medical students about the limits of the mechanistic model of consciousness. I have become, to the quiet amusement of my colleagues, something of an unofficial chaplain to the cardiology department, which is not a role I ever anticipated, and which I have come to understand was possibly the role I was always supposed to be working toward. Gloria and I walk in Riverside Park on Sunday mornings now. We have passed Harold Fitch's bench many times. I always nod at it. Gloria thinks this is eccentric. I think it is the minimum courtesy. Here is the message I was sent back to deliver. Not my message. I want to be clear about that. I am a messenger, which is a humbling thing to be when you have spent 32 years being the expert in the room. The heart you are carrying in your chest is pointing at something. Every beat is pointing at something. The something it is pointing at is the same thing it has always been pointing at, and it is not a diagnosis, and it does not appear on an echocardiogram, and it cannot be stented or bypassed or cardioverted back into rhythm. It is the love that exists before everything else. The love that your heart is both made of and designed to express. Come closer. That is the whole message. To the people who need you present, come closer. To the grief you have been managing from a professional distance, come closer. To the possibility that this life is not an accident and that the heart beating in your chest is not just a pump, come closer. We are not here to be useful from a safe distance. We are here to be undone by each other, regularly, without apology, in the full knowledge that the thing doing the undoing is the same thing that underlies everything, that it does not run out, and that it is what we are made of and what we are going back to. I love you. I mean that with 32 years of cardiology and one morning on a park bench as my credentials. Every one of us is going home to something that has been waiting for us, with a patience so complete it does not register the waiting as waiting at all. We are the wave. We are the ocean. And the ocean, I can tell you from direct and recent experience, is magnificent.